Welcome back to another episode of The Football Chemist, where we use data to go through football's biggest talking points without boring or confusing you with all that technical jargon. Today, we are interested in Frankfurt midfielder Hugo Larsson. Why are we so interested in him? Because Manchester City have been linked with the midfielder's services, and he could be joining them this summer for a fee of up to £50 million. But what do we know about Larsson? What kind of player is he? Why is he so desired amongst Europe's elite? And can he be the player who really revitalises City's team in Pep Guardiola's comeback season? Let's find out. So first things first, who is Hugo Larsson? Hugo Larsson is a 20-year-old Swedish midfielder who plays at Eintracht Frankfurt. He came through Malmö's academy, making his debut as a 17-year-old in 2022. Since he made his debut, he established himself as a cornerstone of Malmö's team before joining Frankfurt for €9 million in July 2023. Since he joined Frankfurt, he has really settled in as a regular, starting in their midfield more often than not. He has been capped 8 times by Sweden, and he is a box-to-box midfielder, someone with the potential to become a real all-rounder in whatever midfield he may be in. However, he will cost a pretty penny for any side that wants to sign him. He is now contracted up until 2029 with no release clause. Furthermore, his injury history is patchy at best. So let's dig a little deeper into what Larsson's style of play is really like. So as I mentioned before, Larsson is a traditional box-to-box midfielder, and when we take a look at his heat map over the season so far, this is really evident. Look at how much of the pitch he covers here. Yes, he's probably slightly more on the defensive side, but that might be reflected a bit in the formation he plays. But he really covers all areas of that middle third. He's able to get out wide, he's able to play in the centre, and he can even break into the box when needed. When he's at Frankfurt, he tends to play in a double pivot, either in a 4-2-3-1 or even a 3-4-3 formation. Although he has shown on occasion that he can play that number 10 role, which is something that clubs might want to look into if they want a nice, versatile, flexible midfielder who can kind of fill all roles in a midfield 3. What's he good at? Well, to be honest, he's just good at everything really, but he does have some stats where he really does excel. As we can see here, his shooting statistics are exemplary. He's in the 99th percentile for shots on target, and his non-penalty XG per shot is also very high. What this shows here is that when he does shoot, he is clinical. He doesn't waste his shots, and he's not the kind of player that takes snatch shots or panic. He makes sure that the value of his shots is very high. Also, what we can see here is how disciplined he is. He very rarely gets dispossessed, he very rarely commits fouls as well, and his disciplinary record in general is quite good as well. Very few yellow cards, very few red cards, and this all added up is so useful in a midfield, especially in a top team where you're really tested for your discipline, because one slight error can be disastrous for your team, given how they'd like to commit players forward. And so you need a midfielder who can stop a counter-attack without giving away too many fouls in the process. But as I mentioned before, whilst he does have these good qualities, his main strength is his roundedness. And this is just exemplified when we take a look at his polygon here. We can see that he's kind of just a bit good at everything here. His progressive carries are a bit down, and I mentioned that before, that he is more of a passer than a carrier, but that's fine because he will be playing in a midfield unit where different players will have different strengths. And the fact that he is so rounded in everything else means that he will complement any midfield he comes into. But just looking at this, his defending's solid, his discipline, as I mentioned before, is exemplary, and his passing stats are pretty good too. And if he were to join a team like City, this versatility will be key. We know that Pep Guardiola loves to have fluid players who can kind of play in all sorts of positions. He doesn't like to stick to a set formation throughout a match. You'll see him moving players around, inverted fullbacks, wingers cutting in, you name it, you will see it in a Pep Guardiola team. And as I mentioned before, when he plays for Frankfurt, he tends to play in a double pivot alongside Oscar Højlund, who is the younger brother of United striker Rasmus. And when we see their two polygons side by side, you can see why Frankfurt are doing so well in the Bundesliga right now with these two players. Because when we overlap their two polygons, we can see that they cover all sorts of different departments. Any weakness that Højlund has, Larsson covers. Any weakness that Larsson has, Højlund covers as well. Between the two, they produce a very complete midfield unit. And this shows that Larsson works best alongside someone who's known for his passing and known for being a bit of a tough tackler as well. which is why he would work so well in a double pivot alongside Rodri when he comes back from injury next season. But it's all well and good to go through Larsson's strengths, but what are his weaknesses? Well, we've seen it a bit that his progressive play leaves a bit to be desired, but I wouldn't consider this necessarily a weakness because, as I said before, in a unit, this can easily be compensated for. But something that is a bit of a cause for concern is his injury record. When we look at the injuries he's had over the last couple of years, we're seeing a lot of muscle niggles, which are never ideal for a young player. There are no major injuries over the last 13 months or so, and he's not missed that many matches, but all of these are leg muscle problems really, and these small injuries could be a sign that as he gets further into his career, plays more minutes, he could struggle with some longer term muscle injuries. There could be an underlying issue here, or it could just be due to his youth. Either way, his workload will need to be managed. I'm sure this is something that City's medical staff will look into if they do sign him and decide whether he is right for their team and the demands of the Premier League. Also, I've mentioned it so many times, but he is rounded. Is this a good thing necessarily? We're seeing more and more that Premier League teams are tending to move away from rounded players, your jack of all trades. As the saying goes, a jack of all trades is a master of none. And we're seeing more specialist players in Premier League teams, especially in their midfield, where you've got so many players who can play a different role and kind of complement each other. However, I would still argue that the jack of all trades midfielder is still desired at the top level of football. So that's a brief summary of Hugo Larsson, but how would he specifically fit into Man City's team? Quite simply, Man City have an injury problem. Their short-term problems, of course, have been caused by Rodri's ACL injury, and they have sorely missed him this season, reflected by their league performance. But the bigger issue is the fact that the other midfielders in that unit are all quite old. De Bruyne is 33, Gundogan's 34, Kovacic is quite old as well, Bernardo Silva's north of 30, and so they do need to revitalise their midfield and get some young players in. They have made steps to doing this so far by signing players such as Claudio Echeverri and Nico Gonzalez, who will help revitalise the midfield. But Echeverri is still very young and inexperienced, whereas Gonzalez is more of a Rodri cover than players like Gundogan, De Bruyne, Bernardo Silva. Therefore, someone like Larsson can come in straight away and fight for that place in the starting 11, and that is why City need him so badly. And when we compare his polygon alongside Rodri, we can see why those two would work so well in a double pivot. It's like the story with Oscar Højlund again. Rodri's strengths are Larsson's weaknesses. Larsson's strengths are Rodri's weaknesses. The two just work in tandem so well together. Rodri's the passer, Larsson's the more disciplined midfielder who covers for Rodri's more error-prone side, I suppose, and his defensive weaknesses. City don't need that much extra creativity in their team. They've got so many players who can create chances. What they do need is a solid player who can knit it all together, who's well suited to Pep Guardiola's versatile, fluid style of play, and that is why Larsson is so key. Because in the long term, he can be the successor to Kevin De Bruyne, and as good as he has been for City, as influential as he has been in winning all of the titles over the past few years, he is in decline. This is so clear when we look at these charts. We can see the numbers are just going one way for De Bruyne. His injury problems haven't helped really, but he is just not having the same influence on the team that he had in his prime. His minutes are going down, but even his stats like goals contributions per 90 and tackles won per 90 are going down, which is just showing that he's lacking that bit of energy and sharpness, and unfortunately is no longer the world-class creator and midfielder that he was before. And that is just simply an age thing. And it's reasons like this why City need to revitalise their squad and revitalise their midfield. And that's why Larsson could be key to this Pep Guardiola revolution as he looks to put this season behind him and get back to challenging for the league next year. Because at Frankfurt, Larsson's also got experience with playing alongside Omar Marmoush. And you can imagine if those two are in the midfield together, with Marmoush kind of as the number 10 and Larsson in that double pivot, that relationship could be very important, getting both players to settle in well and just have that natural chemistry. So let's take a closer look at how City could line up with Larsson. As you can see here, I've got the tactics board up again to take a closer look into how City could play with Larsson. It's been a while since I've got this up. Let me know whether you like me doing stuff like this in the video. So I've got Larsson in the double pivot here as number 23 because well, all great players wear number 23 and City don't have a 23. So if he does end up wearing number 23, well, that'd be quite a nice coincidence. But I've got him in the double pivot here with Rodri in what I could imagine would be City's starting lineup next season. Of course, it could change a lot, but as we know, City like fluid systems. If Rico Lewis does start on the right back here, I reckon we could see him inverting into midfield a bit, which then gives Larsson a bit of space here, and we'll come back to that later, because as the defence shifts across, it shows how Larsson's versatility could be used. Could be in a unit of 3, or he could be drifting further forward to kind of go into a 3-2-4-1 kind of position with Marmoush alongside him, a player who's played with before, whilst City in attack go for a more defensive or passing-minded double pivot. And that's why this flexibility could be key, because now we can see players like Larsson and Marmoush really controlling the centre of that 4, which gives license for players like Savinho or Foden to push up out wide. Of course, Foden's a player who naturally likes to drift in, so Larsson would need to cover a bit or drift out wide. So as we can see here, we're seeing Larsson occupying a number 6 position, we're seeing him occupy a number 10 position, we're seeing him occupy wider position. He needs to be versatile, and as we saw before, versatility is key to Larsson's game. If he is in this Pep Guardiola team, which we can see all sorts of different formations happening at different times, then Larsson would be perfectly suited to Pep Guardiola. But if not City, where could Larsson go? As mentioned before, several of Europe's clubs are linked with him, including a handful from the Premier League. For me, the most likely alternative would be a club like Arsenal. He could go in naturally into that double pivot alongside Declan Rice, and he would drastically improve Arsenal's midfield if he did. Because as we look at his polygon alongside Rice, it's a similar story with Rodri. The two just work really well together, cover each other's weaknesses. Rice and Rodri are very similar players in general, so you can see why Mikel Arteta would want to bring in someone like Larsson into his midfield. However, Larsson's injury problems could be a problem for Arsenal as well. We've seen this season that Arsenal do have a bit of a problem with mismanaging their players, shown by the high amount of muscular injuries that they've had this season. And you've only got to look to the other day when Gabriel did his hamstring to see how bad the problem is. Larsson's injury history suggests that if he is mismanaged, he could get some really long-term, more serious muscular injuries, so perhaps Arsenal isn't the best destination for him. So overall, I can definitely see why Pep Guardiola wants to sign a player like Larsson so badly. He would bolster their squad, he would add youth to their midfield, and he's the kind of player that they need to bring in to start planning for the future and planning to try and retake the Premier League crown next season. He may not be ready to be a regular starter, but City have got plenty of options at that midfield, plenty of ageing options as well who he can rotate with over the next season or two before developing into their first choice midfielder alongside Rodri. He will cost a lot though. However, if we look at City's transfer record, we can see that they have been quite financially sustainable over the last few seasons, so they will have cash to spend. We already saw it in January with their big signings, and we'll see it again this summer, which is why they are so interested in Larsson despite his high price tag. But what do you think? Is Hugo Larsson the kind of player that City should be looking for, or should they be looking for someone more complete to add to their midfield so they get straight back to fighting for titles? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and please give this video a like if you like what you've seen. Also, feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I'm getting dangerously close to 100 subscribers on this channel, and it would be really great to get to that milestone before the end of the month. Also, give us a follow on Instagram and TikTok if you want to see some more short form or behind the scenes content. I'll see you next time.